of tonight's show. We're here till 9 o'clock on MKFM in association with MK News. If you'd like to get involved in the debate, you can tweet us at MKFM, at MKFM News, MK News, put the hashtag MK election. Alright, so let's find out from the audience who would like to ask a question then. Who would like to go first tonight? Okay, let's go to the gentleman here at the back. If you could just start by saying who you are and then ask your question and who it's directed to.
My name is Tim Skelton. My question is directed to all the candidates. On May the 7th, the constituents of both the constituencies will have the opportunity to vote in the neighbourhood plan referendum for Central Milton Keynes, which is vitally important to all of us. Can I ask all of the candidates whether they will be supporting the referendum, please?
Okay, so that's to all candidates. Let's start with Sam Crooks.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you, Tim. I'll be voting yes in the referendum for two reasons. One is that I think that the introduction of neighbourhood plans under the Localism Act was an absolutely superb thing to do. And secondly, because I believe that the arrangement, if you like, and the proposals in that plan, which have been worked out between the Town Council in Central Milton Keynes and with representatives of the local businesses, represent an agreed way forward. I'm delighted to see the fact that the whole city is going to be fully involved in saying what it thinks should happen with its city centre. I'm only sorry that there's been so little publicity for what I think is going to be an epoch-making decision.
Okay, let's go to Mark Lancaster, Conservative.
I agree entirely. I'm also going to be supporting it. I think the Localism Act was a fine piece of legislation that this government brought in to try and empower local communities to make decisions over their own future. And I'm delighted that, of course, we've also had a situation in Wolverton where they've embraced this. So yes, on May the 7th, I will certainly be voting in favour, and I would encourage everybody else to do the same.
Okay, Emily from Labour.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because it is the Central Milton Keynes plan, and it is right that everybody across the city gets a say. But I'm worried that because it was the Central Milton Keynes plan, actually not everybody got a say in how it was developed. I think there's a lot of good ideas in it. I particularly like the fact that the market's going to be saved, and that's something I've campaigned hard on, and I think that's really good. But it does worry me the level of knowledge that people have. The neighbourhood plan that's going on in Newport Pagnell, the one in Wolverton, I think I've sensed there's a lot more community engagement. When you go when they're displaying the plans, there's a lot more discussion, a lot more to and fro. And it worries me a bit that potentially the Central Milton Keynes one didn't quite have that because of its nature.
Okay, let's go from Jenny from the Green Party. Sorry.
I'd echo the points that Emily's made. As much as I like a lot of elements that are in the local plan, I am concerned there are elements in there that people aren't aware of, they're not aware of the implications of them. For instance, breaking the tree rule. We know that where a building can't be built higher than a tree, and I know that was broken quite a long time ago by various buildings, but I still think it's really important to ensure that we've not got some kind of high-rise metropolis. We have a beautiful city centre, and as Emily said, I don't think the people of Milton Keynes have been engaged in the process as much as we would have liked, perhaps.
Let's go to David from the Independents.
Yeah, I think that's something that I would support. I've read a bit about what's going on in Wolverton and other places, and think that the general public in Milton Keynes should be involved in going down that road.
Okay, David from UKIP.
Yeah, I mean, largely go along with what everybody else has said. I completely support the nature of what's happened here with localism. It seems to me to be a very healthy thing to do, and from what I've seen and the amount of it I've read, I'm inclined to vote for it as well.
Okay, thanks David. Anyone else from the audience like to ask a question at this stage? Okay, we'll come back to you in just a second, so we'll get some of your tweets as well in just a little bit. Let's go on to the NHS then in Milton Keynes. Obviously we've all heard about the investment in the hospital, about the investment that's been applied for, also about the new bays at A&E, but also at the same time over winter, people not being seen within the 4-hour targets, operations being cancelled as well. So let's go first of all then to David at UKIP. What would you do with the NHS here in Milton Keynes?
Right, well, I looked at some figures the other day that I thought were quite interesting actually. I'd like to share them with you. Milton Keynes is preparing for a population to accommodate around the 300,000 mark. And obviously we have one hospital. Though it is unique in the sense that it is so diverse and such a brilliant hospital. You look at a city of Bristol that has a population of about 430,000, and they have in the region of 10 hospitals, so I certainly don't think it would be irrational and certainly irresponsible of us to consider the idea of actually building an entire new hospital. This is something where it won't necessarily serve us immediately, and it may take a decade or so to go through, but I think if we really do care about our children and grandchildren, looking at supply and demand once again is something that we have to consider sooner or later.
Okay, let's go to David for the Independents.
Yeah, I mean, Milton Keynes Hospital, again, I think it's been in the paper this week, people waiting hours and hours to be seen. From the last time I went, I think that was quite normal. I don't, if that's how it is now, I've not been recently myself, the last time I went, it was exactly the same, massive queue of people waiting to be seen, and you're sitting there for hours and hours. That problem seems to be, it's not helped by people. It seems you can't get to see their GPs, who I think are walking into A&E and creating problems in that way. So there's problems across the board.
Okay, let's go to Mark Lancaster, Conservative.
Well, the one thing that the government has done is to ring-fence the funding for the NHS, and what concerns me is that the head of the NHS, Simon Stevens, says that in order for us to simply stay still, we will have to invest some £8 billion over the next 5 years in the NHS, and I'm delighted that both the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats have committed to doing that. I am concerned that despite all the comments we hear from Labour, who seems to spend most of their time trying to weaponise the NHS, they haven't committed to the £8 billion. They've only committed to £2.5 billion. Locally, I'm absolutely determined that we will get our £178 billion to try and do that. But I have got one sort of slight disappointment. We had the Shadow Chancellor and the Shadow Health Secretary here on Monday, and I would have thought it would have been an island opportunity for both of our Labour parliamentary candidates to go and visit the NHS, but one of them chose not to.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Let's go to Sam Crooks then for the Liberal Democrats.
I don't think that was the most helpful of comments, that last one. I would want to start by just saying that comparing the NHS here with other countries in which I've lived and worked, we don't realise what a tremendous service we have. And I get very tired and upset when I hear it constantly being knocked day after day by politicians of many parties and suggestions for reorganisation and so on. It needs time to be allowed to consolidate, time to absorb some of the changes that have been made. It does need, as Mark said, the guarantee of the £8 billion that is needed to actually keep funding on a stable level and to allow that consolidation. The other thing that I think we need to grasp is the relationship with local government and the need to bring together the provision of healthcare through the NHS and adult social care through the local authorities. That needs to be combined for the longer term.
Sam Crooks from the Liberal Democrats. Let's go to Jenny from the Greens.
Excellent point, Sam. Fantastic. Thank you. I'll get the Green policy out of the way and then just very quickly kind of raise some concerns. The Green Party will invest £12 billion in the NHS immediately, and that would increase by 1% every year to try and account for an ageing population and the stresses and strains that will put on our NHS. From a personal perspective, this year what happened with the Milton Keynes Hospital and Bedford Hospital, I was quite involved in the campaign to save both of them. It felt a lot like our politicians or whoever were trying to play us off against each other. They thought they could turn Bedford on Milton Keynes to try and make them go into competition, but actually we need both of those hospitals, and actually the provision that we're getting from those hospitals isn't enough for the population. So rather than closing one and making all of those, or closing the A&E, sorry, that wasn't very clear, we need to be investing and increasing the capacity.
Thank you, Jenny. And finally, Emily from Labour.
Yeah, well, Darren, you and I have spoken a lot about the NHS crisis when I've been on MKFM. Look, the hospital's in crisis. Instead of actually sorting it out, we've spent about £5 to £7 million on consultants. I mean, private sector consultants, not doctor consultants, figuring out what to do. It's been a waste of money. We all know what needs to happen. We need to be a bigger, expanded A&E. And that's why I was really pleased when Andy Burnham was in town this week, that I actually got to have a private meeting with them, sit down, shows good, I'm not the kind of politician that needs to be in a photo op, but I'm the type of politician that will insist on having a meeting and insist on actually getting things done with the health secretary. I don't meet the shadow health secretary for a photo op. I meet him because actually the case needs to be made for both the GP crisis and the NHS crisis here. And if I could just say just a couple of things about Labour's plan. Labour's plan is fully costed. It's not a trust me, well, maybe we'll get there, but it's actually 2.5 billion that's going to go in there right away, and it's going to be invested in doctors, nurses, home care help, midwives, not on private companies.
Okay, Emily, thanks very much. This is MKFM, the live election debate here at the Civic offices at Milton Keynes Council. So we've got Clumsy, who maybe spends a little bit of time in A&E on Twitter, asking what is being done to ensure that it's not a lottery system when it comes to a GP appointment. Obviously, many people have to phone to get an appointment at 8 o'clock. Very, very busy on the phone line. So first of all, let's go to Mark Lancaster. And, what are you going to do if you get re-elected for the next 5 years as regards as GPs in Milton Keynes?
Well, I'm delighted that we've just managed to secure nearly £2 million from the Prime Minister's Challenge Fund to give us 34,000 extra GP appointments. Now, that's important because at the moment, what's happening is where people choose to go has a big impact on our healthcare budget here. Your cost to the service if you go to A&E when you could be seeing a GP is about 4 times. So by getting these extra appointments this year, hopefully we can break that logjam, which means that we can then take some of the pressure off the A&E, and that in turn means that we can then invest more money into the GP services over the next year. And I'm particularly pleased that after campaigning from lots of people, to be fair, many of them on this panel, that we have managed to get the Willen surgery reopened. The future is not single GP surgeries, it's actually to have larger surgeries so that we can have the resilience of multi-GPs in those surgeries, so that, for example, if one is ill or away, that we can still maintain a level of service.
Thank you, Mark. Let's go to Sam Crooks from the Lib Democrats.
I'll just pick up that last point first. I do agree about the concept of mega surgeries, and we have the 22,000 one that is going to open in Brooklands. But people must be able to travel to them, and so the most important part of the infrastructure there is Arriva and the bus routes that it actually plans to get to those surgeries. If people can't travel to them, they won't work. Looking to the longer term, one of the most hopeful things that I think has happened here has been the new university hospital and the revision that it is going to make for GPs, because the research shows that many people continue to work in the city where they've been trained. And the hospital is going on for the longer term to move into training of nurses and other professions allied to medicine and ultimately pharmacists. And that, I think, is the best longer term thing that can happen to aid not only GP access but also the whole range of medical services in the city.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Let's move straight on to Emily from Labour.
Well, I think let's talk about the wider GP problem in Milton Keynes. We have a growing population. In fact, instead of seeing our GP numbers go up over the last 5 years, we've seen our GP numbers go down, which means that you've got places like Oak Ridge Park where they're actually not giving out appointments anymore. We were in Broughton the other week, and they were talking about how Broughton Gate was actually a real problem to get appointments there. The number of people waiting more than a week has gone up right across the city, and it's getting worse and worse. And there are plans to have an expanded service, but as Sam said, it's got to be an expanded service that's available. I'm really disappointed to hear Mark say that the campaign on Willen's over, because actually in my mind the campaign's not over, because we actually have not seen Willen reopened with the GP in it. We've gone a long way. We've gone a long way to convincing people about the crisis, but actually until those doors are open with a GP that people can see regularly, that campaign for me doesn't.
Thanks, Emily. Let's go to David from the Independents.
GP is, as other people have said, when you need to ring your doctor or go and see your doctor, getting to see them is quite a difficult process. Last time I tried, it was ring up first thing in the morning, then ring back the following day, and then you're lucky if you can see somebody a week later, as long as as long as you're not that ill that you have to. Generally, I go to the walk-in like most people, and that seems to be what people are doing. So, but like I've said previously, with all the people coming to Milton Keynes and coming into the UK, having children and all the rest of it, all of that gobbles up the services and resources that there are. And if you don't keep pace with it, I mean, previously, before I think it was Labour made the changes where GPs didn't have to work on the weekends and in the evenings. I think that's one thing that needs to be brought back. They were all given a big pay rise at the time and do less hours basically, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
Thank you, David. Let's go to the other day from UKIP.
Yeah, UKIP and myself recognise immediately that the NHS is in desperate need of a cash injection. So we're looking at around the 3 billion mark, which would be covered immediately from taking it out of the foreign aid pot. Now, I wanted to also address again the demand on these things. The gross migration figure over the past year was 624,000. The net 298. There was over 400,000 national insurance numbers given out. In many cases, the pot would have never been paid into by them. Now, there is equally individual responsibility on all of us here and all of us listening, where never has the NHS had such strains from people going from self-inflicted drugs, alcohol consumption and obesity. And I think we have to look at ourselves as much as blame the politicians in the NHS. I'm not going to sit here and say what people perceive to be populist, the idea of ring-fencing it, because then you ring-fence middle management, you ring-fence the chief executives, the quangos and the consultants.
Thank you, David. Is there anyone in our audience that would like to ask a question about the NHS? Okay, let's go over to the gentleman here. If you could start by saying your name and where you're from.
Fazil Kunka from Milton Keynes, Connemara. I have a slight experience of Milton Keynes Hospital, and what I'd like to say is that my experience in the ward has been that the nurses have been extremely overstretched. It takes a very long time for them to turn up, and also in my case I had eye problems, and they didn't seem to have the time even to read the instructions to me, which was very difficult. So I had to force them to actually try and bring out the salient points and tell me what it is.
Okay, who would like to respond to that from the panel? Okay, Emily?
I hear many stories like yours all the time, and what's very clear is the staff are working as hard as they can, and they're overstretched and they're burning out. And right now the hospital is only running on their goodwill and professionalism. It has been underfunded, they don't have enough beds, and instead of faffing around, sorry, excuse the language, but for 3 years on what the future of the hospital should be, we should have had it sorted 2 years ago and gotten the plans underway.
Okay, Mark, you'd like to come here?
I would. I mean, we face facts. It's a hospital built in 1984 for a population which was half the size. And this is precisely why we have to get behind the hospital's own bid for the £178 million expansion. It's not just about the A&E. It's not just about a common front door. It's about increasing capacity. And we can only do that if we properly fund the NHS. And that's precisely why the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats are backing the NHS's own plan to invest £8 billion, and why I'm deeply concerned that the Labour Party saying they're going to invest £2.5 billion simply isn't going to pay for the sorts of capital expenditure that we need here in Milton Keynes.
Does anyone else would like to respond? Jenny from the Greens?
It's not really a response, it's just a request that we stop talking about other parties and maybe have a bit more of a positive approach where we're talking about what our parties are intending to do, and get really irritated, and I'm sure lots of people get very irritated when we're just attacking each other and saying how rubbish the other person is.
The Beat of MK, this is MKFM coming live from the Civic offices here at Milton Keynes Council. It's the election debate for Milton Keynes North. Okay, got someone else who would like to ask a question about the NHS. Hello, sir.
Yes, if I could, please.
What's your name, please? Where are you from?
My name's Richard. I'm actually from South Milton Keynes, but I'm from Bletchley. But this is a general question. It applies everywhere. I come across this reference the other day, David Cameron addressing a group of small and medium business leaders. The text of his address is available, but he departed from it at one point. But he said, I've told all my secretaries of state to look at their portfolios and deregulate everything as much as possible. And he went on to say, I quote, from the health secretary, I don't just want to know about waiting times, I want to know how we drive the NHS to be a fantastic business. Maybe the panel would like to comment on that. What on earth was he thinking about? What's he playing at?
Who would like to pick that point up? Okay. David, UKIP?
Yeah, I mean, if it is exactly as you say, then there's a lot of people who are certainly on the left of centre that would say they're not surprised. I've never heard of that myself personally. I'd be happy to catch up with you afterwards to find out the resource. I'd be interested to know. And obviously it's a position that UKIP has been slandered a lot for, that we wish to privatise the NHS. And I'd hope we could take this opportunity now on behalf of UKIP, and I can say that we had that debate in the party. It was a perfectly healthy thing to do, to look at other countries, the United States, which we obviously outruled immediately, to look at France and Germany, etc. And we have decided within the party that we will absolutely support the NHS in public hands and maintain it as much as possible.
Okay, Sam, you're representing the Liberal Democrats tonight, obviously in coalition with the Conservatives. Maybe you'd like to add a point at this stage?
I have no problem about the concept of outsourcing certain aspects of health provision where it increases capacity. What I don't think you can accept is providing that outsourcing as an alternative to something that is already in public hands. And my worry about the NHS is that the way in which the provision, if you like, of a public service is being eroded around the edges. Because I believe that we need to get back to a situation in local government, in health, in education, and in our other core areas of life, in actually affirming the strength of public services and the professionalism of the staff who run them.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Okay, Jenny from the Greens, you'd like to add a point?
I would. Well, I'd just like to say, people seem to mistake businesses for efficiency. People seem to think that the way to be efficient is to run as a business, because people have this idea about the free market delivering something really amazing, when in fact actually what we need to be doing is making our public services more efficient, not making them businesses. And just an experience I've had something I've noticed rather in the city. Our gum clinic used to be located in the hospital, which was great. It's where it should be. It's now been bought by Virgin, it's being provided as a service by Virgin, and is in Boots, by the opticians and next to the spa. Why would our young people want to go to Boots to go to the gum clinic?
Mark, did you want to add a point here?
Yes, I mean, the use of the independent sector in the National Health Service. I mean, the Conservative Party are committed to an NHS that's free at the point of delivery. The use of the independent sector was introduced by the last government. At the end of the last government, about 5% of activity in the NHS was being used by the independent sector. Under this government, it has grown to 6%. You know, so there's certainly no sort of move in that direction. We have a very good example here in Milton Keynes. We have the Blakelands Hospital, which was set up by the last government. It's an independent hospital. Most of its work is contracted from the NHS. In its early setup, it was being paid for contracts, even if it didn't carry them out. It was still being paid for them. That's all changed, I'm pleased to say, under this government. But I'm really determined that I think we just have to deliver the best quality care that we can through the best means that we possibly can.
Okay, just to keep this balanced, and I will take a point from everyone on this question. Emily, over to you.
I just wanted to be clear. So under the last Labour government, there was introduction of some private sector. It was under the principle that Sam said, which is where it added additional capacity. I think that did, in some respects, open the floodgates for what's happened under the Health and Social Care Act. The Health and Social Care Act has essentially said that every activity has to go out to tender, has to go to the market. Now just think of the cost of just that tendering activity. There's not even about medical services. So one of the things the Labour government would do very first day, repeal that Health and Social Care Act, because actually that's how we're going to protect our health service.
Okay, over to David from the Independents. Anything to add, David?
Well, I mean, hospitals, some of them are funded by PFI schemes that are incredibly expensive. I like to say I'm not a great fan of corporations and services being farmed out to people, because generally that ends up costing more money, whether it's the council, the hospital. You know, there's accountability is one of my gripes, if you like, and once you sort of hand things over to private corporations, accountability becomes a real problem, because you can generally only sue the department or whoever it is. The individuals under corporate law can't be held personally accountable, which is why people need to be employed directly by the local council, as they used to be before they farmed out all the services to, I think, a company in Northampton a few years ago. I would like to see the council get all the services back and get rid of all of those companies, and I think that would save a lot of money, and which could be used, whether it's in the hospitals, the schools. We can't afford to waste money, can we?
Thank you. That's David from the Independents. Okay, let's have a look at a question then that's come in to MK News. This is Ricky Oates. Obviously, earlier this year there was a lot of talk about the budget cuts in Milton Keynes and the YMCA not receiving the funding that they'd received in the past. To expand on that question that's been asked by Ricky, obviously it wasn't just the YMCA, it was the Citizens Advice Bureau, the Readers Service, and a number of other charities. The reason at the time was obviously that was given by Peter Marl and the team was obviously reduced funding from central government. So as regards to the candidates that we've got around the table tonight, what would you do to help these organisations? So we'll go to David at UKIP first.
Right, well it's maybe a surprise to those unaware, but yes, the YMCA and then the Citizen Advice have had their money cut, but whilst doing that parallel, there was a chief executive, or possibly two, I'm not sure, employed on the wages annually more than the Prime Minister. So I think that's a difficult one to justify.
Okay, David for the Independents.
No, I don't know.
Respond, shall we? Sam from the Liberal Democrats.
I think there are two problems with the council. The first is that it is trying to do too much, and I'll return to that in a moment. And the second is that the financial situation isn't quite as it's presented. It's certainly true that there have been very drastic cuts, and that has been difficult to implement. But if you look more closely, you find not only, as David said, the issue of salaries, but there are also £79 million in earmarked reserves. And that leads me into that second point. When you look at what those earmarked reserves are being kept for, they're for activities that I don't think the council need do. We don't need the council, for example, to spend nearly £300,000 on celebrating the city being 50 years old. Businesses could do that and would seize the sponsorship opportunity. We have parish councils who would enjoy taking over many of the smaller services that the council runs. A really imaginative approach like that would help the council solve its financial crisis.
Okay, thank you, Sam. From the Lib Dems, let's go to Jenny from the Greens.
Thank you. Hi, Ricky. One of the things the Green Party's, this is specifically to address the point that David raised about the huge salaries. The Green Party would implement a 10-to-1 pay scale so that no one could earn more than 10 times the lowest wage within a company, and we think that's a good way to avoid wasteful pay and ensure that the lowest wages are brought up and the highest wages are brought down. However, moving on from that, we need to increase funding to our local government because they are the people that are delivering those essential services. They are the people that have that responsibility. So on one hand, we're cutting funding. On the other hand, we're increasing responsibility. That seems really bizarre to me. They are the right places for these responsibilities to lie, but we have to give them the money to be able to deliver them properly.
Okay, let's go to Emily Darlington, Labour.
Look, you mentioned there was £22 million worth of cuts that the council had to deal with this year. There were millions of pounds worth of cuts the previous year, £1 million worth of cuts the previous year. And this is what happens when Westminster politics gets so disconnected from local. need, because actually it's quite easy to walk through the lobby with these enormous numbers on a budget and support a budget and not to think and realise that what those cuts mean to you locally. And that's really important for any MP for Milton Keynes. Whenever they're walking through the lobby, say, what is that going to mean? What is at risk? Now, the CAB had its budget cut year after year after year. It was put up in the proposal, my understanding specifically on the CAB, was that there was not to renew it until the council had heard from about what their responsibilities under universal benefit were. So it wasn't necessarily that the CAB would not have a contract, but the council couldn't confirm what that budget would be or what that service would be until they'd heard from Civic.
Thank you, Emily. Let's go to Mark Lancaster, Conservative.
And let's be clear that Hilary Benn, the spokesman in the House of Commons of the Labour Party, has said that under a Labour government there will be no increase in local government funding. So the budget is going to be what it is, whichever of the two main parties gets in power. When it comes to the strategy itself, I just thought it's a really poor strategy. There didn't seem to be any form of strategy underpinning the budget decisions. It was a shopping list of cuts. There were decisions I simply wouldn't have made. For example, at the time that we were cutting the money to the YMCA, employing a new director on £140,000, or giving £15,000 to a trade union, whilst at the same time we were cutting £15,000 to Age Concern, or spending £6,000 on the promotional video over how we can sell this budget to the people. These are fundamentally bad decisions made by the council, and I'm delighted that the two other parties got involved and we seem to have some sense at the end of it.
Okay, Jenny, for the Greens, you'd like to come back on that point?
Why did they wait till the council got voted down, the budget got voted down? Why didn't they get involved earlier?
Well, I think you'll find that they did get involved earlier, and there were discussions from day one, but I'm not a local councillor. Perhaps Sam can comment.
Sam?
I think Jenny is right. I mean, one of my criticisms of what happened is that there weren't opportunities to bring in other members earlier. I do believe that in a council of 57 members, you would get better decisions if all of them were involved, rather than that very, very confrontational way we run our political system at the moment. Which allows me to come back on Mark's last point. He was saying, whichever one of the two main parties comes back into power, I don't believe for a moment either of the two main parties is going to come back into power. They're going to come back into power with other parties supporting them, which brings me right back to my opening point. We need a coalition because it works better, because the Lib Dems are there to actually moderate the kind of activities that George Osborne will get up to, or the kind of mayhem that the Labour... I'm not allowed to criticise other parties, sorry, Jenny.
It's okay.
The potential mayhem that the Labour Party might get up to.
Thank you, Sam. Right, let's talk about policing then. The numbers out this week from Thames Valley Police show a reduction in crime. Obviously, some crimes have risen sharply, like rape, for example. So as regards to policing then in Milton Keynes North, what will you be doing in your parties? Let's start with David, Independents.
Police forces having a budget's cut, I believe. About 400, over 400 policemen today, I think, are all written complaining about the cuts, not just to the pensions, but to frontline services, which they fear is going to lead to increases in some serious crimes. I mean, there's been newspaper articles where rapists, if they say sorry, are allowed to get away with it, as well as some of the, alleged politicians. There seems to be a deadly silence, it seems, from all the parties to do with the paedophiles in Parliament. I think they're a threat to national security, and I think that is unforgivable. I actually personally wrote to all of the MPs in the UK and asked them to use their parliamentary privilege to name those who they suspected or knew to be paedophiles, and to my knowledge no one has replied. And as we know, people like Jana and that are being protected, it seems, by people in the establishment.
Okay, let's go to Mark Lancaster on this point as regards to policing.
Well, the policing budget has been difficult over the last few years, as many of the departmental budgets have been, as we've desperately tried to sort out the mess that was inherited. But I'm pleased to say here in Milton Keynes we do actually have more policemen on the street in 2015 than we did in 2010, and that is partly down to the great work that our senior police officer has done. Equally, if you judge by outcomes, yes, some individual crimes are up, but overall the level of crime by any measure is down here in Milton Keynes. But at a personal level, partly because of my own background, we hope to get rid of the deficit within 2 years, meaning that once the debt starts to come down, then of course it means that we can spend more money on public services, and the Home Office and policing would be one of my personal priorities.
Let's go to Jenny then from the Green Party.
I unusually would agree with Mark on something. I think that, I think policing in this city I feel safe, and I don't think there's many places where you would feel like that. And therefore I think the question has to turn onto our prison system and what's going on in our prison system. Our prison system is being privatised, particularly in Wood Hill. We've got a suicide rate that's just completely unacceptable. And people might say that prisoners don't have any rights, but everyone should have rights and everyone should have their rights respected. We need to be looking at why we're putting so many people in prison, what laws are putting people in prison, and thinking about maybe reforming that and changing the way that we deal with crime, looking at restorative justice, looking at making victims and perpetrators of crimes face each other and understand the implications of their actions, and thinking about how we can move forward as a society rather than punishing.
Thank you, Jenny. Let's go to Sam Crooks from the Lib Dems.
A very similar theme in terms of prisons. I think, first of all, that I would not put people who are drug users into prison if that were their only offence. The way to deal with the problem of drugs that we have in society is to regard it as being much more an issue of health and addiction, and not think that the only way in which you deal with it is by punishing those drug users. And the second thing is to see prisons and prison sentences as being an opportunity to rehabilitate, so that we don't get to the situation where people leave prison and without any kind of aftercare at all or any kind of helpful training find themselves recommitting offences. So we need to use prisons much more in a preventative capacity in that sense. One last comment, if I may, about cuts. One of the reasons why there are more police officers now, as Mark said, is because in 2011 Thames Valley Police took £3 million out of their budget by cutting out a whole layer of management.
Let's go to David at UKIP.
Rehabilitation seems to me to be an awful totalitarian concept where the state, almost like the film Clockwork Orange, would seek to re-engineer or re-educate a person's character. I'm not interested in doing that. Prisons are supposed to be a punitive experience. They're supposed to punish, and it's quite hard to get into one in the first place. I mean, you have to commit 20 or 30 crimes to get there. I mean, murder, you'll go straight there. For how long is a different matter. But the real problem is people who live criminal lives, it's largely a career at the moment where the rewards heavily outweigh the risks. And I think that has to be altered. We've replaced the belief in incarceration, austerity and humiliation, that of imprisonment, with the ideologies of rehabilitation and re-education, the idea that every single crime can be justified by a person's upbringing, environment or addiction. It seems to me to defy the concept of this country being equality under the law and the law of the land.
That's David from UKIP. Let's go to Emily finally on this point.
I think it's really interesting what Mark says, because it doesn't actually reflect the way people are feeling and what they're saying, particularly with the closure of the community policing centres, 3 of those in Milton Keynes North, the rest of them in Milton Keynes South. That was a really visible community presence of policing, and actually that is very important for people's confidence and to drive down rates of crime. The other hidden crime stuff that I'd like to talk about is domestic violence. That actually the reporting rates are going down, not least because of the changes in legal aid support to those victims, and actually we need to reverse that. So what would Labour do? Well, first of all, we'd get rid of this failed experiment of elected police commissioners. Politics has no place in how we run our police. It's very important that we do that, and all that money saved will actually put back into local policing, because that is actually where it should be.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Has any of our audience tonight got a question on policing? So anyone here got a question on policing? Okay, let's go over to you, sir.
it's more about prisons, actually. I have been given to understand that there are prisoners who've been detained without trial. Now, habeas corpus is a basic fundamental democratic right. Could the panel tell us how many there are in Milton Keynes?
Mark, would you like to pick up that point?
I don't know how many there are in Milton Keynes, I'm afraid.
Okay, it's probably a question that you wouldn't know the answer to. Anyone else like to pick up that point?
Well, habeas corpus is the absolute bedrock of our liberties. It's the one thing...
This is David from UKIP, by the way.
It's the one thing that's more valuable than democracy, I think. It's the one thing that stops the state from becoming too powerful, the fact that you cannot be detained without evidence. And it's my fear that on the wider picture, that of the European arrest warrant, that has single-handedly defied habeas corpus and undermined it severely.
Okay, thank you, David. All right, we've got a question that's coming via MK News from Carly Jane Barson, asking, should people that live and work in Milton Keynes be made a priority when it comes to housing? She's lived in Milton Keynes for 32 years. Is there anyone on the panel that would like to pick that up? Anyone got any policies as regards as housing for local people? Okay, David, go ahead.
UKIP does actually have a policy which mottoed is local houses for local people, not necessarily to positively discriminate, but to allow, or almost to the point of guaranteed, if possible, those. As I said, I've been born in Milton Keynes General Hospital. I would like to live in Milton Keynes for the remainder of my life. It seems like it's going in a good direction at the moment. And, you know, the idea that I could be driven out by people being put here, say, if they're traffic from London to here, or immigration again to come up, really makes me discontent. I genuinely think there should be a mechanism of some sort. UKIP has outlined that in our manifesto, where local people can be prioritised for local housing.
Okay, Emily from Labour.
Guys, I wanted to address Carly Jane's point, because I think it actually points to a wider point, which is the housing problem. But picking up how council housing is currently allocated, it's allocated on need, and that's really important. When we talk about children and our most vulnerable, we've got to put them first, and I think that's right. The reason the crisis is so hard, and the fact that often there's this narrative that local people can't get a council house, is because we don't have enough council housing, so we need to build them again. But David actually picked up an interesting point. We have a problem with Tory councils in London deciding that they don't want to build council housing, so they're going to pay for the first 6 months of a tenant moving to Milton Keynes, and then it's left to us. That seems a bit odd. Really, we should all be in this together, and we should be building council housing everywhere, not just clearing out certain parts of London of council estates.
Jenny, did you have a point on this?
I was going to say exactly the same thing,
Jenny,
Emily, but what I would say is that we have to be thinking about support networks and how important it is to have those routes. And yes, housing has to be allocated on need, people, but we don't support single people. We don't see single people without a home as having a need. And we have this, I can't remember the term for it, but I think it's intentionally homeless, where people who may have mental health problems aren't attending mandatory meetings and therefore aren't being provided housing because they're being told that they've done it on purpose. No one wants to be... there was a story in the paper actually about a woman who was living in her car with her daughter. She had mental health problems, she was made homeless, and she ended up living in her car, and the council... They completely disregarded her and said they had no responsibility for her because it was intentional. What's going on there?
Okay, this is MKFM live from the Civic offices here in Milton Keynes. I'm taking the responses from the candidates in the order that they've put their hand up to respond. Mark, over to you.
Once again, we are as a panel talking about what we know, which is that we have a shortage of housing, and that the only way that we can get young people into housing is to build more affordable housing. And yet, with respect, it only seems to be the Conservative Party that actually has a plan about releasing the capital so that we can actually build those houses. It's all very well talking about the fact that we need more homes, but we have to come up with a plan and a vision and a determination to do it.
Okay, Jenny, very quickly.
we pay for those. We pay to build those houses from our funds. We use taxes. We invest in houses. We save money from welfare because we're not paying housing benefit. So actually, it's an investment. You pay housing benefit, you get nothing back. It's private landlords that get that back.
Okay, Jenny. Sam is shaking his head. Sam?
No, I was just thinking in terms of the way in which capital was raised, and I was worried that anybody should think that housing is financed through our council taxes, because it's not through capital grants.
Okay, and Dave from the Independents, you got anything to add on this?
Yeah, I don't think that council houses, that people should be allowed to buy them, otherwise simply you don't end up with any council houses left, and as we all know, over the last 20 years or so since Margaret Thatcher's day, they've all been sold off, some have been bought, and people have been put in them, and they've been rented out. The rent's being paid by the council, social security, that kind of thing, making some people a huge amount of money. But if you don't build council houses to replace the ones that were sold off, I mean, they had all the money back in the day when they sold off all the council houses. So to say that they need money when they've had it and didn't use it is a bit rich, isn't it?
That's David from the Independent Party. Can I ask the audience if they've got any questions at all on any subject? Okay, let's just go back to the council chambers. Okay, if you could just say your name and where you're from.
George Harlock, Woolstone, Milton Keynes. It's only 2 weeks now to polling day. I don't know how many people are listening on radio, but there are actually only 14 of us in the public here tonight. Other hustings that I have been to have not been terribly well attended. I'm the only person in Woolstone that's got a placard in my garden. You don't see posters up anymore. Clearly the public are completely disconnected from this whole process, or they appear to be. Why does the panel think that is? And what can you do about it?
Okay, does anyone like to pick this point up? Let's go to David then from the Independents.
I think that's basically that MPs they're allowed to lie to us, for one. They don't keep the word, for two. I mean, the list of what MPs say and do, you know, we've all seen on YouTube where they say one thing one day and something completely different the next day. And I personally don't think things will improve until all of our public servants are made personally accountable for the mistakes they make.
Mark, do MPs lie?
Well, I've never lied. I'm a good boy. But on a serious point here, I was very pleased when it comes to accountability to have supported the recall bill that we had in Parliament. I, in fact, voted for full recall, which meant that constituents will have the ability, providing a certain number of them asked for it, could actually cause a by-election to recall their Member of Parliament. In the end, it got watered down slightly because not everybody agreed with me. But we now have a recall bill in Parliament where if MPs do commit various acts, then their constituents have the right to recall them. And I think that's a positive step when it comes to making MPs even more accountable to their constituents.
Okay, anyone else on the panel like to add a comment? Emily Dines, Labour.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's really important that we don't blame the public for the fact that they don't trust politicians, but actually we look at ourselves as politicians or people trying to be politicians saying, how do we need to behave differently? And I think one of the things we need to behave differently is, first of all, politics have changed. Being an MP is a full-time job. There shouldn't be paid consultancies and paid directorships. Most of this panel has pledged to do that. Second of all, you're right, trust in politics is so important, and that breaking that bond is so important. And Mark, I'm afraid, I'm really sorry to say this, but your leaflet has a Labour Party person on it who objects to being on it and was never asked to be on it. And that's just not true. That's not fair. And I hope you rectify it.
Mark, just out of fairness, give you an opportunity to respond on that if you want to.
I'm unaware of what Emily is referring to.
Okay, maybe you can pick that up separately after tonight's debate. Okay, this is MKFM. Let's go to Sam Crooks from the Liberal Democrats.
Well, four things. I think, first of all, Westminster is broke, as we said at the beginning, and so there is not the interest or respect, if you like, for the political process that there used to be. The second thing is that there is a feeling on the part of the public that nothing will change. They're all the same. It doesn't matter which lot is in. So there's that disconnect as well. The third point is that the campaign is simply too long. There was a time when Parliament was prorogued and you were then 4 weeks until polling day. Now it's 6 weeks and it seems to have been going on for the best part of a year. So people have switched off from that. And then finally, I think our way of communication has changed. The old days when you had the morning paper and the evening news has become in fact the 24-hour cycle and communicating through social media, and that's just overkill.
Okay, let's go to David UKIP.
Yeah, I completely agree with the comments about learn from our mistakes, and I think to take action on to learn from those mistakes would be the right of recall, which UKIP supports wholeheartedly. I have absolutely no blame for the public whatsoever. Most of my family, even in this position, still have immense apathy, and I think George Galloway hit the nail on the head when he said that if a backside could have 3 cheeks, it would be the Lib Lab Con.
And let's go to Jenny finally from the Greens.
Yeah, right, okay. I would suggest going to a website called They Vote For You, on which you can have a look at your MP's voting record. I think it's really important that we are able to hold our MPs to account, and it's a really good way of people being able to engage with exactly what it is their MP is doing. Also, it seems that because of our party political system, our parties engage mostly with those swing voters, those people that are sitting in the middle, that they might be able to win from the other side. What about disabled people? What about BME people? What about young people? These are the people that feel really isolated from politics. This is the reason I have become involved in politics. So it's something I feel incredibly passionate about, and it's tactical. People are put off by the tactical and the aggressive nature of it. We should have a political system that is founded on cooperation, on people coming together to work for the common good and to make things better for everyone, and PR would do that.
That's Jenny from the Green Party. Is anyone else in the audience that would like to ask a question this evening? Okay, thank you. Let's move on then to rural areas. Obviously there's been a lot of discussion about the cost of fuel in rural areas and also cuts in the bus services as well. So let's find out what the parties are going to do for rural areas. We'll start with Jenny from the Green Party.
The Green Party will increase funding for buses to rural areas. It's really important that we stop becoming so reliant, or we stop being so reliant on our cars. Whether you like it or not, we are facing a climate crisis. That's something that has to be addressed, and using our cars less is a good way to do that. Having public transport, when the budget was set, I was here in the public gallery listening to a lot of the feedback that was being given during the debates, and you were hearing from really vulnerable old people terrified about how they were going to move forward if their bus service was cut, because it was the only bus service they had and it was their only access to the outside world. We have to ensure that we're providing services for these people, these vulnerable people who are really suffering under the current system where the services for them are being cut again and again and again.
Let's go to Emily Darlington for Labour.
Yes, I think buses are really important. One of the problems is buses are no longer in local authority control, and actually Labour would return that, because then it would be able to plan routes that were profitable for people, not profitable for corporations. The other big thing about the rural communities, we've got to remember how many businesses are out there. Actually, there's small businesses, whether it's a farmer running its business or many of the other types of business that we see, and we've got to deal with the broadband problem that we've got. It's patchy enough in Milton Keynes in the centre. It's really bad out in the villages, and it really needs to improve.
Let's go to David from the Independents.
Yeah, I think services for people in rural areas are vital for those people, certainly those on lower wages who don't have a car, or old people, disabled people, anyone who needs the service. And I think it should be provided directly by the local authority and nothing to do with private corporations that are making money out of people. I'd say I'm against keep handing all. It seems like it shifts responsibility and costs more money. So why would you want to make things cost more and for people not, you can't make them accountable when things go wrong? It seems a ridiculous thing to do, but that's what they do.
Sam Crooks, who's representing the Liberal Democrats this evening.
Thank you for keeping saying that, Darren, just to remind people. I won't repeat what has been said about the need for services and broadband and buses and so on, and I'll go off on a slightly different tack, which I think is the need to protect the natural environment that there is in rural areas. The fact that so many of us go out and drop rubbish is a very good example. The decreasing interest or understanding of the need to protect our trees. The diverse species you get there, particularly bees and insects and so on, and the way in which those species interact. There's a whole hinterworld, if you like, in the rural areas that is not understood by people who live in cities. And I think that's an issue that we have to grapple with.
Okay, let's go to Mark Lancaster, Conservative.
Well, I think the key issues have been raised. I mean, here in Milton Keynes, we sort of forget sometimes that by geography, 60% of our unitary authority is rural, albeit only a relatively small percentage of the population, about, well, 30% of this constituency actually live there. And they do sometimes feel that they are sort of the frozen north, shall we say, and neglected. And I think we just need to be mindful of that when we make decisions, particularly here in this council chamber, is that there is a large rural population, and that whilst the centre of gravity is here in the city, we must be mindful of the needs, and they've been well raised, which is sort of broadband, buses and various other issues.
Okay, and finally David from UKIP.
Yeah, I think it's needless to say I agree with the sentiment of most of what the panel have said. Certainly for students, public transport seems to me to be vital. Buses, even just for social mobility, but with the ageing population looking soon on the horizon for about a third of the country's population to be over 60, I think we really have to bear that in mind, if not emphasise it more.
Meets the first debate that we've got on MKFM in association with MK News. Thanks to everyone that's come tonight who's representing Milton Keynes North. You'll be able to listen to this again on our website, mkfm.com. Also look back at the tweets as well, following hashtag MK election. Also MK News' website as well has been writing up tonight's debate and will be on the website. So again, thanks to all the candidates that have come along tonight, and also for our audience here in the public. We'll be doing this again next Tuesday for Milton Keynes South. So again, thanks for attending tonight. This is MKFM.
Your city, your station.